This is the short story Caleb's Brother from Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone by James Baldwin. Another time, it was raining and it was still too early for me to go home. I felt very, very low that day. It was one of the times that my tongue and my body refused to obey me. This happened often when I was prey to my fantasies or overwhelmed by my real condition, and I had not been able to work up the courage to ask anyone to take me into the show. I stood there, watching people go in, watching people come out. Every once in a while, when the doors opened, I caught a glimpse of the screen, huge, black and silver, moving all the time. The ticket taker was watching me, or so I thought, with a hostile suspicion, as though he were thinking, "You just try to get somebody to take you in. I dare you." Actually, it's very unlikely he was thinking at all, and certainly not of me. But I walked away from the show because I could no longer bear his eyes or anyone's eyes. I walked the long block east from the movie house. The street was empty, black, and glittering. The globes of the street lamps, with the water slanting both behind them and before, told me how hard the rain was falling. The water soaked through my coat at the shoulders, and water dripped down my neck from my cap. I began to be afraid. I could not stay out here in the rain because then my father and mother would know I had been wandering the streets. I would get a beating, and though Caleb was too old to get a beating, he and my father would have a terrible fight, and Caleb would blame it all on me and would not speak to me for days. I began to hate Caleb. I wondered where he was. If I had known where to find him, I would have gone to where he was and forced him, by screaming and crying even, to take me home or take me wherever he was going. Then it occurred to me that he might be in the same trouble as myself, since if I couldn't go home without him, he, even more surely, couldn't go home without me. Perhaps he was also wandering around in the rain. If he was, then, I thought, it served him right. It would serve him right if he caught pneumonia and died, and I dwelt pleasantly on this possibility for the length of the block. But at the end of the block, I realized that he was probably not wandering around in the rain. I was, and I too might catch pneumonia and die. I started in the direction of our house only because I did not know what else to do. Perhaps Caleb would be waiting for me on the stoop. The avenue, too, was very long and silent. Somehow it seemed old, like a picture in a book. It stretched straight before me, endless, and the streetlights did not so much illuminate it as prove how dark it was. The familiar buildings were now merely dark, silent shapes, great masses of wet rock. Men stood against the walls or on the stoops, made faceless by the light in the hallway behind them. The rain was falling harder. Cars sloshed by, sending up sheets of water and bobbing like boats. From the bars, I heard music faintly and many voices. Straight ahead of me, a woman walked very fast, head down, carrying a shopping bag. I reached my corner and crossed the wide avenue. There was no one on my stoop. Now, I was not even certain what time it was, and everything was so abnormally, wretchedly still that there was no way of guessing. But I knew it wasn't time yet for the show to be over. I walked into my hallway and wrung out my cap. I was sorry that I had not made someone take me into the show because now I did not know what to do. I could go upstairs and say that we had not liked the movie and had left early, and that Caleb was with some boys on the stoop. But this would sound strange. I had never been known to dislike a movie, and if our father was home, he might come downstairs to look for Caleb and would not know what story I had told, and who would, therefore, in any case, be greatly handicapped when he arrived. As far as Caleb knew, I was safely in the movies. That was our bargain, from which not even the rain released me. My nerve had failed me, but Caleb had no way of knowing that. I could not stay in my hallway because my father might not be home and might come in. I could not go into the hallway of another building because if any of the kids who lived in the building found me, they would have the right to beat me up. I could not go back out into the rain. I stood next to the big cold radiator and I began to cry. But crying wasn't going to do me any good either, especially as there was no one to hear me. So I stepped out on my stoop again and looked carefully up and down the block. There was not a soul to be seen. Even the Holy Roller Church across the street was silent. The rain fell as hard as ever, with a whispering sound, like monstrous old gossips whispering together. The sky could not be seen. It was black. I stood there for a long time, wondering what to do. Then I thought of a condemned house around the corner from us. We played there sometimes, though we were not supposed to, and it was dangerous. The front door had been boarded up, but the boards had been pried loose, and the basement window had been broken, and boys congregated in the basement and wandered through the rotting house. What possessed me to go there now, I don't know, except I could not think of another dry place in the whole world. I thought that I would just sit there out of the rain until I figured it was safe to come home, and I started running east down our block. I turned two corners and I came to the house with its black window sockets and garbage piled high around it, and the rain moaning and whistling, clanging against the metal and drumming on the glass. The house stood by itself, for the house next to it had already been torn down. The house was completely dark. I had forgotten how afraid I was of the dark, but the rain was drenching me. I ran down the cellar steps and clambered into the house. I squatted there in a still, dry dread in misery, not daring to look into the house, but staring outward at the bright black area railing and the tempest beyond. I was holding my breath. I heard an endless scurrying in the darkness, a perpetual busyness, and I thought of rats, of their teeth and ferocity and fearful size, and I began to cry again. If someone had come up then to murder me, I don't think I could have moved or made any other sound. I don't know how long I squatted there this way, or what was in my mind. I think there was nothing in my mind. I was as blank as a toothache. I listened to the rain and the rats. Then I was aware of another sound. I had been hearing it for a while without realizing it. This was a moaning sound, a sighing sound, which mingled with the sound of the rain and with a muttering human voice. The sounds came from the door which led to the backyard. I wanted to stand, but I crouched lower, wanted to run, but could not move. Sometimes the sounds seemed to come closer, and I knew that this meant my death. Sometimes diminished or ceased altogether, and then I knew that my assailant was looking for me. Oh, how I hated Caleb for bringing my life to an end so soon. How I wished I knew where to find him. I looked toward the backyard door, and I seemed to see, silhouetted against the driving rain, a figure, half bent, moaning, leaning against the wall, in indescribable torment. Then there seemed to be two figures, sighing and grappling, moving so quickly that it was impossible to tell which was which. Two creatures, each in a dreadful, absolute, silent single-mindedness. I watched crouching low. A very powerful and curious excitement mingled itself with my terror and made the terror greater. I could not move. I did not dare to move. The figures were quieter now. It seemed to me that one of them was a woman, and she seemed to be crying, pleading for her life. But her sobbing was answered only by a growling sound. The sobbing began to rise in pitch, like a song. Then everything was still. All movements ceased. My ears trembled. Then I heard only the rain and the scurrying of the rats. It was over. One of them, or both of them, lay stretched out in this filthy place. It happened in Harlem every Saturday night. I could not catch my breath to scream. Then I heard a laugh, a low, happy, wicked laugh, and the figure turned in my direction and seemed to start toward me. Then I screamed and stood straight up, bumping my head on the window frame and losing my cap, and scrambled up the cellar steps into the rain. I ran head down like a bull, away from that house and out of that block, and it was my great good luck that no person and no vehicle were in my path. I ran up the steps of my stoop and bumped into Caleb. "Where have you been? Hey, what's the matter with you?" For I had jumped up on him, almost knocking him down, trembling and sobbing. "You're soaked. Leo, what's the matter with you? Where's your cap?" But I could not say anything. I held him around the neck with all my might, and I could not stop shaking. "Come on, Leo," Caleb said in a different tone. "Tell me what's the matter. Don't carry on like this." He pried my arms loose and held me away from him so that he could look into my face. "Oh, little Leo, what's the matter, baby?" He looked as though he were about to cry himself, and this made me cry harder than ever. He took out his handkerchief and wiped my face and made me blow my nose. My sobs began to lessen, but I could not stop trembling. He thought that I was trembling from cold, and he rubbed his hands roughly up and down my back and rubbed my hands between his. What's the matter? I did not know how to tell him. Somebody try to beat you up? I shook my head. No. What movie did you see? I didn't go. I couldn't find nobody to take me in. And you just been wandering around in the rain all night? I shook my head. Yes. He looked at me and sat down on the hallway steps. Oh, Leo. Then, you mad at me? I said, no, I was scared. He nodded. I reckon you were, man, he said. I reckon you were. He wiped my face again. You ready to go upstairs? It's getting late. Okay. How'd you lose your cap? I went in the hallway to wring it out, and I put it on the radiator, and I heard some people coming, and I ran away, and I forgot it. We'll say you forgot it in the movies. Okay. We started up the stairs. Leo, he said, I'm sorry about tonight. I'm really sorry. I won't let it happen again. You believe me? Sure, I believe you. Give us a smile then.